June 11th. This time I stand for the pledge of allegiance. Mr. Holmes, please, the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So this is our special work session for survey results. We've got one item on our agenda this evening. So at this point in time, we can turn it over to Superintendent Stutler to kick us off and introduce our guest.
Sure. We will introduce her. Her name is Jennifer. She came the long way around and brought her through Elkins. Are you from the DC area?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
So her GPS brought her the scenic route, so she's gotten to see some of it.
It was beautiful.
So she's mainly really, I had an initial meeting with her, maybe a couple meetings. Her point person has been Mr. Oliverio. They worked well to put this together, and we appreciate her. And we're going to really turn it over to you. She has supplied all the information, and you should have that in front of you. And I think she's going to work through that with us to see what we can find out. We appreciate it.
Great, of course. I think it's going to be displayed as well, the PDF that you have. So that way we can kind of go through, we can talk about it. If you have any questions about anything, we can answer them. I would really love for this to kind of be more conversational than just me presenting at you. So that way we can kind of talk through any questions or concerns that you might have as it relates to the survey and the focus groups. So the first thing, I just kind of want to recap what exactly we did to collect the data and let you know what it is that you're looking at. So we did a survey, went out in the month of March. It went to parents, staff, and then students in grades 6 through 12. The parent and student surveys focused on teaching and learning, safety, security, student behavior, family engagement, and then there were some social emotional development questions for the students. For the staff survey, it was kind of divided into two parts. The first part were school climate questions that went just to campus-based staff. And then there was a second part, which was the employee engagement questions that went to all staff members. And so how you'll see the PowerPoint survey, big long one, that's going to be divided to where all the school climate questions are first. So you'll see a cluster bar graph that compares responses of parents, campus-based staff, and students. And then it has the individual breakdowns. And then after that section is going to be the section for employee engagement. And that's just the employees who answered the survey. And then there's also going to be a thematic analysis section. On the survey, we asked an open-ended question for them to provide additional feedback. And so each group has an analysis of their questions that were answered. The second part, which you will see if you have this one is the focus group. And we did 60-minute virtual focus groups. So we did 2 sessions for parents, we did 1 session for staff, and then we did 1 session for high school students. We originally intended to have 3 sessions for staff, but we only had, I think, 8 staff members say that they were interested, and of that, only 3 attended. So the focus groups, very small subset. I think we had 3 parents attend the first session and 7 attend the second. We had a total of 3 staff members, and then we had 16 high school students attend. We did see much greater participation with the survey results. We had almost 30% participation from parents, which is great. Typically, we aim for at least 15%. We had 39% for staff. Typically, we aim for 40 to 50% for staff response rate. Students was a little bit lower than we like to see. Typically, we also aim for 40 to 50% for students, and we got 16%. Any questions about any of the methods, when things were done, or anything like that?
Yes, it's about incomplete responses are not included in reporting. What did you consider just incomplete responses?
So typically what we do is if a participant does not click submit to do the survey, it's considered incomplete. And so when we do formal reporting like this, we don't include them. It's actually something that we're debating this summer as to whether we should or should not include them moving forward. If you're interested in seeing those data points, I can do a report that is just incomplete responses for you. The reason why we don't include them is the idea that unless they click submit, we can't with full confidence say that that's what they intended to say, because they could always go back and change their answers if they change their mind. But we can certainly get a report for you that includes just those responses, because sometimes it could just be that they don't click it properly to submit it, but we have no way of knowing. So if you're looking at the PDF file of the slides, it'd be the big packet. At the beginning of that, there are several slides that include summary and insights. And so what we do is we comb through the data and we pull out any information that is relevant. We call out any gaps and alignments and perceptions. And so highlighting some of the points, and we can go through and talk about them. When we ask the question about quality of education, and then we ask overall perceptions of culture and climate, you had 78% of parents and guardians, 89% of campus-based staff, and 67% of students said the quality of education at their school was excellent or good. When we asked about the overall culture and climate or environment of their school, favorable responses were a little bit lower. You had 74% of parents and guardians, 66% of campus-based staff, and 52% of students say that it was excellent or good. So that there tells us, there could be some gaps and alignments between the culture and the climate at the school compared to the academic perception. And so what this survey does is we go through the different aspects, the teaching and learning, safety and behavior, social emotional development. Those are all aspects that research shows make up your perceptions of culture and climate. And so working to improve those pieces will help improve that overall culture and climate, which is where you see a lot of impact on engagement, satisfaction, involvement. And so academically, the biggest kind of thing that came out was just parents and students calling for maybe a little bit more equal distribution of resources across the high schools specifically in terms of extracurriculars that were available or AP classes that were available. There is a perception, I think, that some of the high schools have more opportunities for advanced students compared to others. When we look further into teaching and learning, there were high scores as it relates to teachers setting high expectations, clearly explaining those expectations. One of the pieces where there appeared to be room for improvement, which is consistent across every district we have worked with, this is the one that always comes in lowest, is that concept of taking what you're learning in school and connecting it to real life examples. So that is the one that always comes in lowest. You'll see 53% of parents and 48% of students either strongly agreed or agreed with that point. When we look at safety, security, and student behavior, when we compare your scores to kind of what we see in our benchmark report, you had higher perceptions of overall safety compared to our national report. So 87% of parents, 86% of campus-based staff, and 72% of students feel their school is safe. Where there was opportunity for improvement or gaps in perceptions was the idea of student-to-student relationships. That, again, is pretty consistent with what we see across the country, especially now with the perceptions that student behavior is getting more disruptive in the classroom. That kind of came through as well through some of the open-ended feedback that we received and some of the themes that came out from that, and the idea that some parents and students have a perception that discipline is not enforced fairly, that there's instances of favoritism, lack of transparency with student behavior policies and kind of what happens at the individual buildings. So there's opportunity. That's one of the ones we've highlighted as an opportunity to where maybe there could be more transparency and clarity in what the policies are. I know that there's a lot with FERPA that keeps you from saying, you know, specifically what happened, but maybe opportunity to kind of to structure more or more clearly define kind of the path of, if this happens, this is the first step. If this happens, this is what takes place. And really kind of setting that out for your community. Schools that have done that have seen a good percentage of favorable responses. When we look at student support and relationships, this is typically higher than what we see when we look at some of our benchmark data. You had 84% of parents, 87% of students say that they have someone at school they can go to for help with a school problem. And then it was 80% for parents and 83% of students who said that there was someone they could go to for help with a personal problem. This is actually one of the first times I've seen student responses be slightly more favorable than parent responses to these questions, which speaks highly of the staff at your middle and high schools. Just for students do feel like they have an adult at campus that they can go to. And parents echoing that as well.
How's that compared to national?
National's a little bit lower. So what we see at the national level is you will see the 80% for having a school problem, but typically we see it drop down into the 60s when parents and students answer if there's someone they can go to for help with a personal problem. And that was one of the things too that didn't come through your open-ended responses that we often see is a huge call for mental health and well-being and increased counseling services. That wasn't a big theme that pulled through, which is good because it means that students do feel like they have someone they can go to at school, regardless of the type of problem.
Mr. President, is that okay, just to direct?
Yeah, we're in a work session, I think, you know, as long as we're not stepping over each other and as long as we're civil in our discussion, we can engage.
The next kind of subset we asked was about support from teachers, staff, and school leadership. So for parents and students, we asked about any type of interactions that they had with anybody on campus, whether it was a teacher, staff, school leadership. There were slightly lower responses and favorable responses from parents, just compared to some of the other items. 72% said that they were kept informed about their child's academic progress, and 75% said that they were kept informed about behavioral concerns. And then you had 60% who said that they regularly received the information and materials to help their child at home. That is something that was also echoed in the open-ended responses, is just some parent frustration over different schools and different grade levels having different guidelines in ways in which they communicate and how frequently they communicate with parents. Parents wanting more consistency in terms of what platforms are used, as well as kind of knowing every week I'm going to get this kind of update, or if I need to know this kind of update, this is the process that I need. That's something that we've seen pretty consistently, you know, over the years in terms of parents just wanting that more structured approach, as well as frustration over different platforms being used, not only at different school levels, but at different grade levels. And it gets especially frustrating for parents who might have someone in high school, middle school, different grades in elementary school. So kind of finding a way to either be able to audit that and streamline that across the district and schools, or kind of having, you know, a more intentional playbook about at this school, this grade, this is what you're using, you know, this is what this teacher, you know, give at the beginning, the teachers at the beginning of the year, set the kind of guidelines and standards that parents can expect, to saying, the third Friday of every month is when I input my grades. I know that that's a big one. I have a 13-year-old right now in public school, and the number of times that he comes home and his Schoology is showing that he's got a D and hasn't turned anything in, and he's arguing that he's done it and the teacher hasn't, submitted it. Being able to know I can rely that the third Friday, that's when I'm going to check my kids' grades. It saves a lot of aggravation in the house. The next section was parent engagement and involvement. 32% of parents said they take part in school activities, and that was just as they do it often, whereas 43% also said occasionally. We do find that typically parents are more involved at the elementary school levels, and that just tends to be because they have more opportunities for parents to be involved. It kind of trickles down, I think, as parents have students that go from middle school to high school, the opportunities to get into the classroom and read a book. You don't have that really in middle or high school. So that's pretty much what we expect to see in terms of parents and participating and their perceptions of it. 57% are helping with homework or projects. 58% are helping with homework or projects, and 57% said that they were interested in events and attend events like concerts and sports. One of the things that came through is parents would like to see a little bit better communication in terms of notification of when those things are happening. So the ability to kind of plan ahead or have a school calendar that they can go to that's updated every month to know when things are going to happen. I know that that's something that we experience in our household too. Our child is not good at all about telling us when things are happening. And so I think a lot of parent frustration gets directed at the district because their students not communicating, and the teacher said, well, I told the student's job. So trying to help mitigate that and just taking more ownership of it as a district in the school and not relying on students to relay the message is something that we have found has helped within our home district and our home. In terms of campus-based staff engagement and involvement, this is where we asked staff how they were interacting with students outside of the classroom. 66% said that they feel supported or very supported to participate with students in activities outside of the classroom. 44% said that they do engage with students outside of the classroom at least weekly. 51% said that they do so by attending school events. And then the kind of biggest reason that staff were not participating or participating more were lack of time, as well as concerns over having that work-life balance. And then wrapping up the last point for the school climate questions was related to student engagement and involvement. There was a high percentage of students, 70%, who do participate in extracurriculars or sports activities. And among those students, 66% were playing sports and 39% took part in performing arts. There were some other options there that you can see on the main slide, but those were the two biggest. So those are sports and performing arts. Those are kind of the big units that students are participating in within your district. And then of those who don't participate, 55% said that they weren't interested, and then 38% said they just didn't have the time with their schedule before or after school. Any questions about any of those questions? Any points that you want to go through and look at the individual answer distributions in the slides?
Is there a standard or what you find mostly used for communication out there? Now everybody uses something different.
They do. And what we have found with that is one of the most helpful things that we have found is doing that audit of which school levels are using what and for what grades, and kind of getting it all in one place, and then doing a review to see if there's any opportunity to streamline things. A lot of times we have found that even within the same school, sometimes there's not as much collaboration as you would like. especially across schools for who's doing what. A lot of times if that is something that is autonomous for individual school leaders, they will pick something that they know. And so really just doing that audit and trying to get a visual of what is taking place across the school to see if you can streamline has been super helpful. It's a pretty easy lift, especially over the summer when you are having work sessions with different school administrators. Getting that information is a pretty easy lift, and then kind of looking at ways, even if you can't streamline, but getting together that district playbook of if you go to this school and your kid's in this grade, you can expect to use these platforms. And just having that information available on the school and district websites is also a way of saying, you know, the information is there, letting them know that the information is there.
Could you differentiate like who were parents and who were grandparents in the family surveys?
I did not in this. We could potentially do that. They do self-select if they're a parent, and then they would self-select other and fill in. So theoretically, we could go through and pull out responses of people who selected other and then selected grandparent, and we could do a comparison that way.
Because I'm just kind of curious with some of the grandparents and great-grandparents that even if we have the best platforms, they don't have access to them, or families that don't have internet at home.
Yes. I would say that would be true.
Were
And
you able to look at our county website and see any of this material that you thought was good for the parents out there or the grandparents? I mean, and if so, what did it look like compared to national?
I have not done a review of your website. I can, you know, there are next steps from here. That's one of the things is like, this is not the end of our relationship. You get to see me more. So that can be one of the next steps I can do is do an audit of the website and see what's on there, or even how hard or frustrating it is to find something. You know, the number of times I've gone to client websites and I can't even find the little search icon. And so I can understand sometimes how that could be frustrating for parents as well. So that can be that, as well as kind of looking at grandparent responses and pulling that out.
I'm just wondering how accessible it is to, and to the schools. I mean, the school website for the parents, or, you know, because if little Johnny's not coming home to tell him, then mom or dad should be able to look somewhere and see that, which I feel that they're able to do that in our district, maybe.
No, we can certainly do that. And that is actually something when I first started, we were actually working on 4 projects at the time to help districts redesign their websites. And one of the ones we did was for Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. Because sometimes if you don't have an outside perspective and you go in and you know where everything is, you take for granted how difficult it can be to look for things. I personally find it always frustrating to look for school calendars. Every district does it differently, and even every school within every district does it differently. So that's something else that we've seen that some of the districts who have done website redesigns is come up with templates for different school levels, so that, you know, if you're looking at this school and then you're going to hop on to look at this school for your other student, you at least know where you need to go to search for something. So that there's always opportunity there with that. Overall, like looking at the climate responses, the district does feel favorably towards everything that's taking place. The things that pulled out as that kind of low-hanging fruit where there could be improvement as it relates to school climate is just, again, that communication in the sense of it being more consistent across schools. The discipline being more consistent and kind of more transparent in terms of what happens when this takes place and what can be the expectations for that. Because we find it does vary teacher to teacher, it varies principal to principal. You know, and sometimes if student A has been in this school since kindergarten and you know the family, you might unintentionally go easier on them than you would, say, a new student who you don't know as well. And you know, those things do take place. And so to be able to have a guideline for everybody, it also helps teachers feel like they have leadership who have their back. Because, you know, we've worked with districts where teachers will want to follow guidelines or put discipline into place, but then when it gets passed up to school leadership, there's no follow through. Or, you know, parents come in raging about, this is so unfair that you're doing this to my student. You know, if you haven't documented as to what the process is when something takes place, you've got that as a nice little CYA. And then you're also supporting your teachers and letting them know that they are holding students accountable for the disruptive behavior, which is big. And then the other one was just the kind of more transparency in communication and more opportunity for feedback. I think this was one of the things that David and I talked about, especially with the participation for staff being on the lower side, and then especially for the low participation for focus groups. This being taken as like a baseline, knowing that this could potentially be one of the first very concerted efforts of trying to get district-wide feedback. So making sure that as we move throughout the summer and move into next year, that you're very purposeful about closing the loop. So sharing the results of these through infographics, posting them on websites, school sites, social media, and not only sharing back what the feedback was, but what next steps were. So including in there at the bottom, and we'll have templates that I'll share. But next steps, we held a board meeting, we discussed it. Next steps are working on, you know, we've selected streamlining communication. So we're going to try to do an audit and really sharing back with the community and getting them involved with the survey results and what you're doing in the next steps. It helps get buy-in, and then it knows they're reminded that they are able to have input on decision-making or making changes within the district. And then that helps with participation for the next survey, because now they feel, oh, they are listening to us, they're taking it seriously, and then you'll have more participation next time. So any other questions about the kind of culture and climate, school climate aspect?
Just talk about professional development of staff. Were there any questions?
That's coming. Yep. And I asked because I separated because it's a different focus. So now the second part, because really what we did for your survey for staff is what I like to call a Franken survey. We took our school climate benchmark survey and our employee benchmark survey. We parsed it down a little bit just so it wasn't too lengthy. And we put that together. So campus-based staff answered all of the questions, and then non-campus-based staff were able to answer the employee engagement. So you were able to get feedback from everybody. And the employee engagement questions, that survey is set up. Let me see. I reordered my slides. So let me see what slide it is. And we can get it switched to that slide. If you are able to switch it to slide 80, possibly? Yeah, 80.
That's 8.
Sorry, it's a big report.
This only has 73.
Oh, that'll be, oh, okay, you have this one then. You have the abridged version, sorry.
Okay.
That would be. Slide 44. Okay, and you go one more forward, please. Perfect. So these are our overall engagement questions. So how our overall engagement survey works is we have these 8 to 9 questions that are kind of the higher level engagement questions of the individual dimensions throughout the employee engagement survey. We take these, let's see. Yours are going to be way to the back. You have the full report, so y'all's is probably going to be the slide 80.
It's gonna be the 80.
I believe so.
It's a quarter inch Facebook screen for that.
Love those
I gotta put my glasses on and see
Yeah,
them.
I was on page 80.
No. What's the first question? I keep reading.
It says, I am proud to work for this district. And I'm sorry, I don't have the
It's 82,
82.
page 82.
Okay.
So we take these 9 questions and each of the answer options is weighted. So if they select strongly disagree, their answer gets weighted as a 1, and then it goes up to 5, to where if they answer strongly agree, it's weighted as a 5. We then take all 9 responses for each participant. They get averaged together and they're given a score. That score can be anywhere from 0 to 5. Based on their score, they are categorized as either highly engaged, engaged, or less engaged. So if you look at slide 83, and it's the next slide on this one, this is the overall engagement classification. So this is kind of where we get that big picture of how staff are feeling engaged within their position and within their role. So you have 21% who feel highly engaged, 48% are feeling engaged, and then 31% are feeling less engaged. That doesn't mean they're not engaged. It just means that their average score is less than a 3.5. The idea that 3 is that neutral response of neither agree nor disagree. It's not necessarily bad to have high percentages of participants who select that. These are the ones who are kind of like meh. They don't have a feeling one way or another. And as you go through and you are asking engagement questions to your staff, you want them to instinctually just be like, well, yeah, I feel that way. That's great. So these are the ones that we say, depending upon the question, their meh response could be because they don't know. It could be they just don't necessarily have a feeling. And so there's opportunity within these to focus on kind of those items where you have high percentages of neither disagree nor agree, because you want to be able to shift those into the agreement versus, taking this data, not doing anything with it, and then slowly those will move into the next year being more disengaged. In looking at your overall engagement questions, I will say for several of the sections, there were higher percentages of neither disagree nor agree responses than we typically see. Usually with the kind of neutral response, we see a lot of neutral response for district leadership. So it's not necessarily that people are dissatisfied with district leadership. It's just that they're so far removed from them that they don't know how to respond. Because a lot of times when you have teachers or support staff, their main interactions are going to be with their school or department leadership. And so that's why when you look at school department leadership, there's less percentages of the neither disagree nor agree, because you really know what you see every day. And so a lot of times when we see those gray areas for district leadership, that's the opportunity for different styles or different ways to communicate, the opportunity for being more visible. One of the comments that came through just from overall feedback from staff was wanting more visibility from district leadership and the school board, both during schools, during the day, at different events, and really kind of trying to have that more intentional display of leadership at the district level to really help build that community and trust within your schools, within the district, which is great. I will tell you, we have seen very aggressive responses from people on how they feel about district leadership and school boards, and you don't have that. You're well liked within your community to the point that they want to see you more, and that also is a low-hanging fruit, to find those ways to give more of that kind of community feel in just increasing that visibility. not having a work-life balance at this point when you're in such positions. To the engagement classifications, we ask our engagement drivers. So these are the different areas that research has told us really feeds into having high levels of engagement and satisfaction for your staff. So this is looking at the district mission. So not only is it well communicated what the overall mission and vision of the district is, but different staff members know how they can support that. So a lot of times what we've seen with districts who've been successful in getting high percentages here is having a well-designed strategic plan that not only has kind of what your goals and objectives are, but what the action steps and key performance indicators are for measuring those, and kind of being able to share out at the end of the year, this was goal X, and we did this throughout the year, and we saw this shift. So if you put an initiative in to reduce attendance or absenteeism in students at one of your high schools, say you pilot something to do that, and then you see that, in fact, that had a positive impact, sharing out with your community that we did this initiative, and we saw a decrease of 5% in absenteeism from students. So finding ways to be very intentional about sharing out, even at the individual school levels, those goals, how you plan to achieve them, how your staff can support them. I find even with my own team, when I let them know individual steps and tasks that they do that works to improve our overall goal, they have more buy-in to it and they want to do it more because they know it's really affecting more of that bottom line. Next is district leadership. We talked about that. We did ask about the Board of Education. So again, you see that large percentage of neither agree nor disagree. And so that, when we look at these types of questions, is just, they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. They might not have the type of exposure that they want. They might not follow board meetings, so they just, they don't know. And so there's opportunity there for finding ways to communicate more about what decisions you're making, what you're talking about, and trying not to have the idea that, well, we post the minutes on the website so they can go see it if they really want. Trying to be a little bit more intentional or active in engaging with your community. That's always a great step too for seeing positive improvements in those areas. School and district leadership, again, these typically we see more favorable responses here and less of the gray area, just because it's who you're interacting with every day. These are the ones that we really recommend for the site reports, that individual school and department leaders kind of look at these to see how their staff are perceiving them. Overall, though, the positive perceptions, the favorability of strongly agree or agree is pretty consistent with what we see within our benchmark report. The next big one, and this is not unique to this district, and it actually came through a lot in the open-ended responses from staff, but was this idea of feedback and recognition. People always want to be recognized and appreciated, both at the district level and at their site level. It also came through a little bit in the student responses that they would like more accolades for their achievements. This again is not unique to your district. It's typically probably the second lowest one that we see that comes through. One of the feedback, or one of the open-ended responses feedback, was just the idea that it could be something as simple as a handwritten thank you note. It doesn't have to be these big displays of appreciation, but finding ways that are consistent, not only across schools and across school levels, but consistent in terms of year to year. So what we typically recommend for this is going through, and similar to communication platforms, doing an audit of what you really do throughout the school year, both at the site level and district level, to show appreciation for your staff and students. I think it's very easy to say, well, we do this during Teacher Appreciation Week, or they get, wear jeans to work week on this Friday. But when you put it all down on paper, sometimes it's kind of an aha moment that maybe you're not doing as much as you could be doing. And again, they can be very simple things like a handwritten thank you note. That typically goes a long way. We've seen, obviously it gets hard when you have big schools, and I'm sure your hand gets tired, but we've seen principals who have gone and given handwritten thank you notes to their staff just at random points throughout the day. And those sites are random points throughout the school year. And those sites have higher percentages of staff morale and feelings of appreciation compared to others who kind of keep it with the routine of, we say thank you before the holiday break, we say thank you during Teacher Appreciation Week. But finding those unexpected moments to show appreciation. A great idea that I actually heard, I was listening to a podcast on the way up here, and a great idea that I heard about student recognition is that there's schools who will display the names of students who make honor roll, whether it be straight A's or ABs. Those schools actually had higher student achievement academically than schools who don't, because you see that you could get recognition for being AB honor roll, and students will strive to earn that. And so that's a simple kind of low-hanging fruit way that you can work to improve feedback and recognition with your students as well. Next, we ask about the work environment. This here kind of talks about colleague-to-colleague relationships. So there are high favorability here. Nothing in this area really stood out as an area to focus on for improvement. Their colleagues are feeling supported, they're committed to their jobs, and overall are feeling kind of that sense of belonging. One area, and we kind of already touched on this, is the item of related to ideas, feedbacks, opinions are valued. And I think that's where, you start to be really intentional about their opportunities to provide feedback. In the sense, we put out a survey, we gave you the opportunity to do focus groups. This is the participation that we got. So we're giving you these opportunities. Now you need to take the opportunities, which I think is going to be that next step that you take. Should you do the survey again, or should you do focus groups again? And really working to close that loop and letting them know when their next opportunity is coming. This is where we asked about PD, so career growth and training opportunities. A lot of gray in the area. This is one that we typically see higher gray areas and lower percentages of favorability, which is the idea. People are feeling encouraged to participate, but sometimes the training is not necessarily as effective as people want it to be. A lot of the things that we see through responses is working to have those professional development activities that are more scaffolded. So, if you've been a teacher for 2 years, maybe these are your options to attend. But if you've been a teacher for 10 plus years, maybe these are your options to attend. So the idea that, what might be great for a new teacher is something a veteran teacher is not going to want to sit through. And then offering teachers things outside of their subject area to give them opportunity to grow in other areas. So maybe offering teachers the opportunity to do some sort of leadership development session or something to where they can work on growing some of their skills that might be for outside of the classroom. And one of the great things to do with that is working to tie back the professional development and how that ties back to your strategic plan or your goals for the district or the school, and saying, this professional development directly ties to this goal. And so if this is an opportunity that you want, or this is, something that you want to work on, this could be how you're contributing to furthering our mission and our goals by improving this specific area. And now we're giving you this opportunity for you to work to see how you can improve in that area. Salary and benefits, everybody always wants to make more. We ask this question pretty much to all our districts, and I don't think I've ever worked with a district that was a resounding effort of satisfaction. I think right now, just across the board for districts, especially at the teacher level, they're feeling, overworked, overwhelmed, and underpaid. So that certainly isn't anything unique to your district. I think here, it's maybe trying to talk about some of the benefits and reminding them about benefits that might not necessarily be salary related. I have this conversation a lot with my staff about reminding them about some of, the non-paycheck benefits that come with the job, getting summer hours. You're not going to get that if you work for a think tank in DC. We get the 2 weeks off, on the holiday break that other organizations don't give off. So kind of reminding them about some of the other benefits, the flexibility throughout the day, to be able to take your kids, to drop them off and pick them up at school and not have to have them in aftercare. So finding things like that, whether it's at the school or district level, that you can remind people of, as well as if you need to do comparison charts of, a teacher with this tenure might make this in the district next door, but this district also gets this grant or, gets this credit that we're not eligible for. So being more transparent or making it clear for them as to why their counterpart in another district might be making more when they have the same experience. As well as benefits to your community. So what you have here within this community that makes it more desirable to live here than a community that, might be further out. If you're 30 miles from Target here, but the next district over is 100 miles from Target, that can be a luxury that some people don't want to give up in a non-pay benefit for living in this area. And then that kind of slide after this just talks about what we've really already gone through in terms of additional feedback from staff members. A lot of it related to just ideas and wants for improvements in, health insurance or just overall compensation. That was really kind of the big piece that came through from the open-ended responses when we did the employee engagement section. In the employee engagement report section of that big piece that you have, and I'm not sure what my time is, so.
You're fine.
Okay.
No, midnight, that's it.
Hotel, so I just crashed on the way home.
There you go.
If you look in the big report, you will see, it might be around page 103, focus areas for improving employee engagement. One of the things that I think is fun that we do with our employee engagement report is because we give each employee an engagement score, we're able to then make correlations to the individual items of the survey. So those kind of driver questions that weren't part of those overall 9 questions. And we're able to then, based on correlations, divide each item into one of 4 categories. And you can see on, and I apologize, it's not going to be on the screen.
What is it?
That is 98.
So if you, it looks like this. Sorry. So there'll be, you see the 4 square boxes.
The strong, weak, and.
Yes.
If you go to 102 and just go 4 pages.
Yep, that's where I was at.
So
It'd
it's
be
3
105,
pages.
it'd be 105.
102 and 3 pages.
Classifying focus areas.
Yes. So what we do is we take the kind of average score of all items within the employee engagement questions. And then we take the average correlation to engagement and we divide everything into 4 sections. This helps highlight what we consider strong. So there's a strong correlation to engagement, but that score for those items is below the average. So these are ones that, based on your district-specific data, if you worked on improving these, would be likely that you would see the biggest improvement in engagement. So these, a lot of these, you'll see opportunities to increase engagement. It should be the next slide.
Are you talking about increasing the engagement of employees, students, parents?
Just employees. Yep, so this is unique to the employee engagement section. And it does not include those student climate factors that we talked about earlier. But here, where we see opportunities that could have a huge impact on engagement, a lot of it relates back to visibility with district leadership in the school board, and then that opportunity to be a part of the decision-making or having a say in kind of the direction of the district and how what they're doing as individuals supports the direction of the district. One of the other ones, feeling appreciated for their work. So we see that on there, as well as the ideas, feedbacks, and opinions are valued. So what we recommend is kind of looking at some of these items and seeing what are some actions we could do to try to see improvement in this area. And so just looking at the last one about ideas, feedback, opinions are valued, that's where it'll be really important to kind of what I said before, close the loop on the work that you've done already in terms of sharing out survey results, sharing out, what you found from the focus groups, and how you plan to really use that data to make some changes. So that lets them know right off the bat, oh, I took that survey. They really did sit and talk about it. And they did talk about what they're going to do with it and how they're going to use it to see improvement. And again, some of this stuff, it doesn't have to be big grand gestures. Feeling appreciated, it could just be, oh my gosh, I opened my mailbox today and I got a thank you note from the superintendent thanking me for what I did. And it could be, one of your cafeteria workers, and now all of a sudden they're feeling super appreciated and recognized, and they'll go through, and that will be contagious within their work site. As well as, if you do that for everybody, it really helps with that morale and then wanting to go above and beyond. Because people, and what research says is when you feel valued, you want to go above and beyond. And especially for teachers, when you do that, the impact on student success increases and student engagement increases, which is really the mission of what districts are meant to do. And so the other kind of categories in this, the next slide, which is green, the opportunities to maintain engagement. These are the ones where they're correlated to those engagement scores and the district is already doing well. So this is where we say, keep doing what you're doing in these areas and seeing how you can kind of continue to grow and maintain the consistency. The other 2 slides that you see that are blue and orange, these are the ones that were kind of below the median, but so they relate more to the overall work environment. A lot of you see these here would be like colleague relationships, professional development opportunities. So these are ones where they statistically kind of miss that correlation mark for being directly tied to engagement, but improving these would improve the work environment, which overall would improve engagement. Any questions about that? I know it's so much data to comb through. And so I'm kind of just trying to hit all the high points for you for each of the topics versus scrolling through the individual slides, especially because there's 121 of them.
I have a question about the likelihood to recommend section. That kind of threw me off a little bit considering from the overall employee happiness with their work. This was kind of different. Can you explain?
Yes.
Page with that.
100, page 100.
And we also ask that to parents too. So for parents, we ask their likelihood to recommend their child's school. And so for that one, okay. So what these questions are, they're what we call the Net Promoter Score or Employee Net Promoter Score questions. So they're the type of questions where you use an Uber ride, you get a survey after, and it says, how likely are you to recommend somebody to use Uber if they need a ride home? And you give a score of 0 to 10. If you give a score of 0 to 6, that just indicates it's kind of categorized as not being likely to recommend a place. If you give a 7 or 8, those people are typically what we call passives. So they just don't have an unequivocal opinion one way or another. And then people who rated a 9 or a 10, those are your ones that are actively promoting. So they're the ones who are going out and saying, oh, you're going to move to the area? Well, you want to move to this neighborhood because then you're going to be zoned to this school, and this school is great. And so if you, let me back up. So you will get a score anywhere from negative 100 to 100. And so the kind of guiding line is anything above 0 that's positive is seen as good. Because that just means you have more people who are actively promoting your district than who are taking away or, not likely to actively recommend it. For parents, you had a score of 19. That's considered high in education. What's considered really in education and for school districts, what we kind of say is that exemplar is around 40. So to get an ENPS of 19 for parent recommendations is good. People are talking positively about it. They're saying, oh yeah, you should move to this district and send your kid to school. And I never realized how many people actually have conversations like that until my son started school. Because when we first started doing this work, my son was younger and I wasn't talking about, oh, well, this school is great and this school maybe not so great. But parents are really out there, especially when you have at the middle school and high school level where you're feeding in different schools. It's that reputation that's going around. And so this just indicates that your schools have a positive reputation within your community and with your parents. After that, you'll see factors impacting NPS. So they're able to select if this particular kind of category had a positive impact, a negative impact, or didn't really have any type of impact. And so what we like to recommend when you look at these is kind of looking at some of the items that had a negative impact. And so you'll see communication, 18% of your participants said it had a negative impact. Then you look at the open-ended responses and you see a lot of that is that frustration that they feel with needing more streamlined communication across your schools, just in the sense of consistency. And so when we go back down to the ENPS, which is very similar but a little different in the sense that we're asking, if you knew somebody who was a fit for a position, how would you be to recommend the district does exist to work? And so your score is a -4, which again, it's below 0, but it's not bad. I think the lowest I've seen was a -88. So you also have a very high percentage of passives. You have 29%. And so you've got people who are selecting a 7 or an 8, which if I were to give my place an 8 to work, that's not bad. It just means I might not be actively recruiting for people to come work at my place of work. And so I think what could be interesting that I can pull and give you is a breakdown of the individual percentages of responses. And so what I think you're most likely going to see is probably a higher percentage of people giving 5s and 6s versus people giving, 0s and 1s and 2s. And so is a 6 really bad? No. But when you use the Net Promoter Score, because it classifies it as a detractor, it just sometimes there is a difference between what you're seeing in terms of recommending the place versus their own satisfaction with the place.
So if it's not bad, is it good?
60 in the classroom isn't good.
No.
There are so many factors that go in to the Net Promoter and what people are thinking about. We have been seeing much lower scores in the field of education compared to other fields of work just because of what's happening outside. So this was given in March. I think by that time, there were concerns about education as a whole and kind of what's happening with public education. So sometimes people will take this and they'll say, well, I don't know what's even going to happen with my own position next year or our own district next year, so I'm not going to recommend somebody to come work in education because it's not a great field right now. And then there are people who take it and say, well, I work here, I really don't like my job, but I'm about to retire anyways. I don't want anybody to work here, but I'm going to finish it out, so I'm going to give it a low score. So there's a lot of variability that goes in with Net Promoter Scores that you don't necessarily see in some of the other questions where you have that agreement scale. And so this is not put all your eggs in one basket with this. This is kind of a piece that just helps you look at some of the other things that are going on. And so when you look at the factors impacting, this is where you kind of are going to pull out your information. And so one of the things that's having a more negative impact is the visibility from district leadership and school board members. That has 35% said that has a negative impact. 25% the compensation and benefits are having the negative impact. And so kind of looking at those, you also have very high percentages of people that are kind of neutral on the impact. And so to have 34% who are classified as 9s and 10s, and then 29% of passives, the majority of your staff are at 7 or above. And I'm willing to bet the other kind of big bucket of people are probably at 5s and 6s, and I can pull that up and get that sent over to you. And so again, I wouldn't necessarily call it good or think this is the data point I want to share. But it's not bad, one, compared to what's taking place nationwide, and two, this opens up for a lot of outside influence that is without or not within the district's control. So you can't control what's happening in the field of education as a whole. So this is one to kind of look at in how your pieces you can control, just knowing that in the background, there are some nationwide impacts here. And again, I have had to tell a district before that their score was a negative 88, and that was not a great conversation. So this here could shift very easily into the positive. Again, you have 39% participation, so there's a large population of people who could pull it up as well.
How did trust come up? Like from teacher to principal and principal to school board?
Let's see. So most of those kind of pulled through when we look at the open-ended responses. We do the analysis of those for each group. Pull up. What slides those might be? I think they're right after the employee question. So this is where kind of for staff members, the feelings of distrust came from wanting more visibility, availability, and interactions with leadership at the higher levels. Because again, you have your everyday interactions with those who are at your site. And so really wanting to have the interactions, wanting to be able to provide feedback, wanting to be able to have conversations about the feedback, ties into having clearer transparency and them feeling like they know what's going on, and that they have an opportunity to provide input to that, as well as having that consistent communication. So kind of like what we talked about with the parents, knowing every third Friday of the month, I'm going to get this. The same type of thing coming from district level. So maybe the third Friday of every month, there's a school board kind of announcement of what's gone on that month and what might be on the docket for next month. We have a school district in Texas that did monthly videos of chats with Charles. And so every month he'd record, a 10-minute video talking about what went on the previous month, what's looking like for the month ahead. And it brought a lot of goodwill within the district to have that availability. It was sent out there, put on social media. And so being able to have that interaction, they could ask questions, they could submit questions. There was a section of it where he would then read the questions and answer the questions. So a lot of that is from what your responses were, is where the trust is needing an opportunity to be improved.
We could call it Doris D.
What other questions or things do you all want to talk about?
What are these additional feedback stuff? There's additional feedback for all staff members, and there's additional feedback from parents, guardians.
Those are the open-ended responses. So at the end of each survey, we ask that, and so this is the thematic analysis of that. I think we did share the full distribution of responses from each party, but that ends up being hundreds of pages of the individual responses, and this is a summary of all of those.
Anything to talk about that you?
No, it was what was really the big things, and that we touched on were just the communication, the being able to be a part of decision making and having the opportunity to provide feedback. That was something that even came across in the student, is them wanting the opportunity to share the student voice. And then again, just the pull through of the student discipline piece. And again, none of it was unique to your district. They're pretty consistent with what we've been seeing across.
Well, I think with the consolidation of schools, I think the kids have had a really good taste of stakeholders, and I can play a part. And definitely something, that's a real life skill to have.
And the students who participated in the focus group, they were picked by the principals, and I believe that the students were each part of their student council at their individual schools. They were very engaged, very well spoken, and really wanted to share the feedback that they had, as well as feedback that they had received from their peers. And so they're really looking for that opportunity to kind of be a good extension of the work that y'all are already doing and kind of taking that down to their schools. And it provides great leadership opportunities for them.
So then, as you approve your recommendations, on page 9, those are your recommendations as to,
So based on and the recommendations are based on your data and kind of the high level of what research says you can do. Some of them might not necessarily be feasible for the resources that your district has. And so you've kind of got to take that into consideration as you go through them. Some of the recommendations we've talked about, like looking at the communication audit or the audit for feedback and recognition, those are kind of what we like to call low-hanging fruit. It's not a big, heavy lift. It's something you can kind of go and start working on over, the next couple of days or weeks. And then the return on it, based on your data, there would be a real positive impact on it. The other kind of big recommendation is the idea of closing the loop and letting people know we gave you this opportunity. We're really taking to heart what you've said and we're using it. And then letting them know that there are going to be more opportunities. Next year, we're going to offer the same survey and you're going to have more opportunities then to share your feedback.
When do you plan on doing the next survey?
That is a you decision. I'm doing it around the same time. March is usually kind of a sweet spot for these types of surveys. You're able to hit them when they've had the majority of the school year under their belts. So they're really kind of well informed in how they're answering, but they're not quite checked out yet. It makes for a very busy season for us, but it's really that sweet spot we find. And if you ever wanted to separate them out and do the employee engagement survey, or you say you just wanted to do employee engagement this year and then maybe next year revisit school climate, employee engagement is one that can really be done year-round. It's just always important to kind of ask that tenure question so that you can kind of pull out and look at answers of people who've been there 0 to 1 years versus who have been here longer. Just being to take into consideration, they may have only been working in the district for a couple of months.
One comment I heard from a principal, she felt uncomfortable answering school climate because she felt she would just be talking about herself and she wanted the staff. So maybe if we can have a different type of survey that is directed at administrators and their concerns.
That's a great idea. And there's a lot of opportunity with that because, if they select what their role within the district is, the way we design our surveys is we can use question logic. So if they're a school leader, they get a different kind of type of questions. And then those who have that direct student interaction with instructional curriculum, they get, more of those school climate style questions.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
I think these additional feedback here on page 111, 112, and 113, when we're all just by ourselves, I guess sitting around the campfire, whatever, are some nice areas. We really need to look at these, I think.
They give a lot of context to what you see and what pulls through. And that's really what helps differentiate between differences between that you might see between the engagement score and the net promoter score. Because say you went through and you read through the open-ended responses and it's just response after response talking about how terrible a school district is, then maybe give more heed to the net promoter score. But when you go through and some of the responses just talk about education as a whole and why would anybody recommend anybody to work in education right now, then that with the net promoter score, there are outside factors as to why people are giving a lower score there. But you're seeing those positive factors when they're answering the engagement questions that are district specific and there's no outside factors available to be considered.
Any other questions?
Just in this separate report, district and school street, the focus group, are those responses included in the okay?
Yes. So I included those in the report that you're looking at. It's kind of all there. I will say, and why we like to do surveys and focus groups, and it's not, focus groups are not necessarily something that you need to do every year. So like next year, you might just focus on the survey and then, maybe do focus groups every 3 years, or if something new comes up, do very pointed focus groups. But why we like to do them is because it helps validate the data. And really what everybody was saying in the focus groups is exactly what came through within the survey. And so it really kind of helps triangulate that data. And so it just echoed what you see from the quantitative and then the open-ended responses here.
Thank you very much. I think this is a lot to take in.
It is a
A
lot.
lot of good information.
And so really just, I'll say too, kind of one of the next steps, because we talked about recommendations. And so you'll see this beautiful data dive workbook. This is.
That's my next question. What's this?
We have
Homework.
So this is something, and it can be something too where, we can come in and work together again, but this is part of what is a Making Feedback Matter workshop. So this is where we all work together to identify those areas that you want to target. So say you specifically say, I want to target on improving feedback and recognition. And so this is where you would kind of talk about it, talk about why you feel like the score might be low there. That's where you say we're going to do the audit of what we're actually doing. And then you start brainstorming any and everything that you think, whether you're already doing it, which you could do, totally sounds outlandish. And you all brainstorm ideas of ways that for students and for staff, you could improve and make them feel appreciated or recognized. And then from there, you parse down what of those brainstorms are realistic or possible within the next couple of weeks, couple months, couple years, and you put the action plan. And so when you look back, so what, now what, moving to smarter goals, saying, we're going to write a thank you note to every staff member that we have, and we're going to make sure that they have received it in their mailbox before the start of the school year. Or all new teachers, I'm going to handwrite them a letter about how excited I am to have them come on, or their new principal or supervisor writes them that note. Handwritten notes was on my podcast, so that's just what happens to be in my head. I'm the worst about handwritten notes. But I will say the sentiment of them is really invaluable if you think about when you get a piece of mail and it's a handwritten note, the goodwill goes a long way. And so anyways, that's where you would chart it.
I used to get handwritten notes all the time. I see me on your planning period. Talking about.
Sorry, I had to remind
I
you.
know. I knew you were thinking that. I'm sorry.
No, that's quite right.
It was a handwritten note. I had them all plastered on the wall. 10 years. So how are we as a board able to work with this information? Hello?
You guys can make.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have to look at the information, and I would say there's a lot of key points in here that we can identify from the data that was provided, and we could, I hesitate to say have another work session, but have another work session with the superintendent and her staff to kind of identify specific points that we want to address. And we can put together a list of items that we want to see happen, a timeline that can go along when we want to see them happen. And you talk about key performance indicators, KPIs, that would be something that we can easily track along the way to determine the process and how things are moving along in progress of what is being done. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity here to glean from the material and what we can do to just improve the district altogether. What I took from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have an unhappy group of employees. Are we perfect? No, nobody's perfect. We're not perfect. I think there's always room for improvement, but it looked like it was specific areas that improvement was warranted, right? So instead of throwing, spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks, I say we target those areas in the report and come up with an action plan to try to do something about the areas that are in this report.
And they're doable.
I don't see why
It
not. Some of
wasn't
them, yeah.
anything that was outlandish or.
And that's the purpose of a survey, to find out what needs to be improved. And if everyone sitting here didn't see this, you wouldn't know.
Right.
If it hasn't been conveyed to you.
Somewhat. And I think that this can also help us develop a strategic plan going forward, right? The one point that you mentioned in regard to the equitable resources between districts, between schools, that can absolutely be put into a strategic plan to address, AP courses on one school versus AP courses in another school. So, those are the types of things strategically that we can plan for in the future so that other boards can come in and see what we've done and kind of pick up from, where we left off at their design. So that's my thoughts on it. That's where I think we should go and what we should do.
And I will say, in your handy dandy data dive workbook, it does give you suggestions for how you could do that. And one of the things that we actually have people do with the exercise, it seems quite silly, but it's not, is you all have the beautiful colored PowerPoint. Take a pen and go through, circle what you think stands out and put a little, if it's a positive, put a positive. If you have a question about it, you want to discuss it further, you put a question mark. And if it's something that you think is a glaring negative, put a negative. And then when you regroup, you guys can obviously all talk about your celebrations, but share what your negatives are and where you have overlaps and say, you know what, 6 of us thinks that maybe this is a negative, we should focus on it. And then do the brainstorming and try to figure out what's realistic, why it could be happening, and how you can fix those whys.
I think starting out, we should. I didn't see anything in this report that was bad about releasing to the public, right? I didn't see any names. There's not going to be any names. There's not going to be any, somebody couldn't say, okay, well, this is about me, right? I don't think anything's going to be there. But what I do think is that in the effort of transparency and trust, we did this. We asked the community to let us do this, and I think we should share the results with them and show them kind of what is
Yeah, and I
put in here.
don't know if I necessarily call the negatives negatives, I'd call them opportunities.
Opportunities for improvement.
Yeah.
Is there any way to get this
Condensed.
condensed? So they're not fumbling through 200 and some pages worth of, data.
Yes. And I think to that, with the transparency and posting on it, I do think that there are slides that don't necessarily need to be posted because they're not completely relevant to data, but like the focus areas. That's more for you as a guide to know what to do. Typically, it's going to cause more confusion than not. And so I can go through and put together what I would recommend as sharing out publicly, and I can send that back.
But if they wanted to see this, they could.
They could.
I mean, it's available if they want to go through the whole thing.
So these will be printed and available for the public to come and see if they want to upstairs. But we can definitely curate an online version that would be a little bit kind of more palatable.
Yes.
We also have the opportunity for the dashboard. So I can work with our tech team. I personally have not done it. It's a new feature, so I'd have to get my tech team to do it. But we would take this data and you get a public-facing dashboard that includes all of this data. And that's where they get to have the fun. They can go through and see, well, I want to know what this population said at this school or what this question is. And you have that on your website, and people can see it and interact with it. And then you also have, the full PowerPoint if they want to look through it. So that is something, thank you for saying that, because that reminded me.
That's a good idea.
And
Post that too.
And with this, because everything's on YouTube, we can have an all-inclusive. So it can be the dashboard, it can be the documents, it could be her speaking today and all meetings going forward. You can actually have a holistic web page that has every link anybody could ever really want to look through.
Excellent.
And this is great baseline, because as you said, if you're working to do the strategic plan, you know, that can be your goal of what you're working to is you're starting to collect the data, getting all of the ideas, getting things into place, whereas, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years, you come out with your 5-year strategic plan, and you have all of that pieced together.
That was one of our goals for this too.
Well, we do that, so you have me.
Thank
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. We give her an applause. And your team, tell your team, thank you.
I absolutely will.
And
They need to be
from
written out.
79 to 68.
Yes. Well, I mean, I will say I loved it because it was super pretty, but they were all the 2-lane roads and there were a lot of semis. So I got to go very slow and enjoy the surroundings.
Were you on 33? If you were on 33.
I think she was on 50.
It had me go through back roads. Like I went through a location road. I was going through neighborhoods.
Well, it's shorter on a map,
Yes,
not in a car.
I think I learned that. Yeah,
It's like-
I did. And being at night and driving back at night, I would probably go 10 miles an hour and get home tomorrow morning. So I think I'll stick to the interstate.
The deer will greet you.
Yes, exactly.
The baby mountain lion, possum.
Yeah. I don't want to have to submit to workers' comp.
Yeah,
for
just
that.
go up 79 north, catch 68, your GPS will figure it out. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank
Any other
you.
questions, comments? No? Okay.
Other than just thank you, because you've been very accommodating, easy to work with, and I know we've had a lot of conversations with Mr. Oliverio.
We're good friends now.
Appreciate it.
Well, great. Yes, I am readily available. I know we still have some work to do, so I'll follow up with you all. And I'm still available to you to work through any other work sessions that you have when you want to move on to those next steps. And I'll put together some of these documents and probably send you another lengthy email with lots of attachments sometime next week.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.